For thousands of years, humanity has looked at the pasture and seen a symbol of docility, a gentle beast bound to the rhythmic motion of chewing grass. But beneath the placid exterior of the modern cow lies the ghost of a prehistoric titan that once turned Europe's dense forests into arenas of absolute terror. Long before the domestic cow was engineered into submission, the wilderness belonged to the aurochs. This was an absolute colossus of muscle and bone, standing nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder, with forward-curving horns sharp enough to impale a charging wolf pack in thick, charcoal black fur that made it look like a shadow detached from the underworld. It possessed an aggressive, unpredictable temper that made early humans view it not as potential livestock, but as a living force of nature that demanded worship and fear. To hunt an aurochs was not a matter of sustenance. It was a lethal rite of passage where one misstep meant being trampled into an unrecognizable pulp beneath half a ton of furious, unyielding muscle. The evolutionary journey of this creature is a masterclass in adaptation, transforming a primitive wilderness wanderer into a specialized survival engine. As the ice ages receded and the landscape fractured into treacherous woodlands and open plains, the aurochs adapted its digestive system to process coarse, fibrous vegetation that other herbivores found completely toxic or indigestible. This was the birth of the complex, four-chambered stomach system, a biological marvel that allowed the beast to rapidly gorge on massive quantities of grass and then retreat into the deep security of the forest shadows to ferment and digest its meal. This single evolutionary breakthrough allowed the aurochs to colonize vast territories, expanding its dominion from the coast of North Africa all the way across the European continent to the steppes of Asia. It was a creature designed for total territorial dominance, an apex herbivore that feared nothing but the absolute darkest depths of human desperation and ingenuity. As human populations expanded, our relationship with this primeval monster shifted from distant terror to obsessive fascination. Early cave paintings from Lascaux to Altamira do not depict gentle cows. They showcase the aurochs as a majestic, terrifying deity, immortalized with exaggerated muscles and eyes that seem to burn with a fierce, independent fire. Early human tribes realized that this beast held the keys to unmatched resource wealth, hide thicker than armor, bones that could be fashioned into unbreakable tools, and a meat yield that could sustain an entire village through the dead of a brutal winter. Yet, capturing or killing one was a logistical nightmare that required dozens of hunters, pitfall traps, and a willingness to accept heavy casualties. The aurochs did not go down easily. It fought with a terrifying, vengeful intelligence, using its massive neck muscles to swing its horns in wide, sitting arcs that could decapitate a man in a single fluid motion. This perpetual warfare between human survival and animal ferocity set the stage for one of the most radical experiments in planetary history. Around 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent, a few desperate communities managed to isolate and corral the youngest, least aggressive descendants of these wild titans. It was a slow, multi-generational process of genetic suppression, where humans systematically culled the fiercest individuals while preserving those with a slightly calmer disposition. Slowly, over centuries of forced confinement, the towering height of the aurochs began to shrink, the terrifying forward curve of its horns softened, and the wild, untamable spirit of the forest deity was systematically broken down into a manageable domestic asset. This was the birth of the Taurian cattle, a biological transformation so profound that it effectively altered the trajectory of human civilization forever, turning a weapon of the wild into the foundational bedrock of agricultural society. Yet, even as the wild aurochs was pushed toward the brink of extinction, with the very last individual dying in a Polish forest in the early 17th century, its genetic blueprint never truly vanished. The modern cow still carries the ancient, dormant code of its monstrous ancestor, a hidden reservoir of wild instincts and raw physical power that waits just beneath the surface of domestic tranquility. When a modern bull senses a threat or smells the blood of its herd, the docile facade completely shatters, and the ancient fury of the aurochs awakens with terrifying speed and devastating force. This transition from a wild, unstoppable forest monster to a captive partner was not a victory of human strength, but the beginning of a deep, symbiotic binding that would fundamentally alter the physical laws of nature. Because as these newly domesticated herds multiplied, they unlocked an entirely new biological superpower, a hidden mechanical engine inside their bodies that would soon allow them to conquer the world's most hostile terrain. The true supremacy of the bovine species does not lie in its physical strength or its sharp horns, but in a hidden, churning cauldron buried deep within its torso. while other mammals require highly nutritious, easily digestible food sources to survive. The cow possesses an internal chemical refinery that can transform worthless, silica-heavy grass into pure, life-sustaining energy. This system is centered around a massive, four-chambered stomach complex that operates like a highly sophisticated biological fermentation plant. The process begins in the rumen, a gigantic storage vat holding up to 50 gallons of fluid, teeming with billions of specialized bacteria, protozoa, and fungi. This microscopic army performs a miracle of organic chemistry, breaking down cellulose, the tough, woody material that formed the cell walls of plants, which is completely impervious to the digestive juices of humans and most other predators. This internal alchemy requires a bizarre, rhythmic physical cycle known as rumination, a process that is as unsettling as it is brilliant. After rapidly swallowing vast amounts of unchewed grass to avoid being exposed to predators in the open, the cow retreats to safety where it intentionally regurgitates bowls of semi-digested plant matter back up its esophagus into its mouth. This material, known as a cud, is then systematically ground down by the cow's flat, powerful molars, mixing it with massive quantities of alkaline saliva that acts as a natural buffer to control the acid levels inside the internal furnace. Once the mechanical breakdown is complete, the mixture is swallowed once again, passing into the reticulum in the omasum, where heavy folds of tissue act like a hydraulic press, squeezing out every single drop of moisture and recycling precious water back into the animal's system with absolute efficiency. The final stage of this process takes place in the abomasum, the true stomach, where intense acids dissolve the remaining plant matter along with millions of the very microbes that help break it down in the first place. In a cool but brilliant twist of evolutionary design, the cow does not actually feed directly on the grass it eats. It harvests and digests the massive colonies of bacteria that grow inside its own stomach chambers, converting them into a constant, highly concentrated stream of proteins and essential fatty acids. This means that a cow can thrive in barren, nutrient-deficient landscapes where other herbivores would rapidly starve to death, turning a patch of dried, yellow weeds into high-quality muscle, milk, and bone. It is an evolutionary superpower that transformed the bovine from a simple prey animal into a self-sustaining ecological tank, capable of fuel conversion on a scale that no human technology has ever managed to replicate. However, the sophisticated chemical processing plant produces a highly volatile and dangerous byproduct that has begun to alter the very atmosphere of the planet. As billions of microbes ferment the organic matter inside the rumen, they generate massive quantities of methane gas, a highly potent greenhouse material that must be constantly vented from the animal's body through a continuous cycle of eructation. This is not a simple biological quirk. It is a massive environmental force, an invisible river of gas entering the ecosystem every single second from hundreds of millions of grazing animals worldwide. The sheer volume of this internal gas production means that the collective digestive systems of the global cattle population wield more power over the world's climate patterns than entire industrial nations, turning the cow's greatest evolutionary triumph into a complex ecological crisis. Understanding the intense, volatile mechanics of this internal chemical engine completely changes how we view the animal's outer stillness. The quiet cow standing in a sunlit meadow is not resting. It is actively engaged in a violent, high-stakes battle of microscopic fermentation and chemical balancing that requires immense internal stamina. This incredible digestive resilience provided the perfect biological foundation for human empires to exploit, allowing them to weaponize the cow's unique biology to conquer entirely new continents. As human explorers set sail across uncharted oceans, they did not just bring tools and weapons. They brought these living chemical refineries, ready to unleash them upon pristine ecosystems. And when these herds finally stepped off the ships into the untamed wilderness of the New World, their internal engine sparked an ecological explosion that would permanently rewrite the geography of the planet. When the Spanish conquistadors and early European settlers landed on the shores of the Americas, they carried with them a biological weapon disguised as livestock. The pristine, untouched grasslands of the New World had evolved over thousands of years without ever encountering the intense, destructive grazing patterns of the domestic bovine. As the first herds of cattle stepped off the wooden ramparts of transport ships, they found themselves in a paradise of boundless, nutrient-rich forage with virtually no natural competitors to check their growth. Within a few short decades, a handful of escaped cattle transformed into massive, feral armies numbering in the millions, sweeping across the vast plains of the Pampas and the American West like an unstoppable, living tidal wave that permanently shattered the ancient ecological balance of the continent. The impact of this bovine invasion was swift, calculated, and completely devastating to the native flora and fauna. With their heavy, split hooves, the advancing herd compacted the fragile topsoil, destroying the intricate root systems of native perennial grasses and turning fertile riverbanks into eroded, muddy trenches. The cow's unique grazing style, where it uses its thick tongue to rip plants out by the roots rather than clipping them cleanly like native deer, allowed it to systematically strip the landscape bare, preventing native. The pristine front toes were effectively conquered not by the sword, but by the relentless, grinding jaws of millions of grazing cattle. As the landscape changed, native wildlife found themselves pushed into a desperate battle for survival against an enemy that couldn't be fought with conventional animal instincts. The massive herd of American bison, which had ruled the plains for millennia, suddenly found their ancient migration routes intercepted, and their prime feeding grounds degraded by the massive influx of domestic stock. Water holes that had sustained diverse populations of birds, small mammals, and native predators for generations were rapidly claimed and polluted by thousands of cattle, forcing native species out into the arid, hostile fringes of the desert. Predators like wolves, cougars, and grizzly bears initially viewed this explosion of slow-moving, domestic prey as an easy bounty, but this sudden shift in diet triggered a violent, genocidal retaliation from human ranchers who systematically wiped out native apex predators to protect their valuable bovine investments. This massive ecological replacement was further accelerated by the introduction of specialized cattle breeds designed to withstand the most brutal and unforgiving climates. In the arid, sun-scorched brush of Texas, the descendants of Spanish cattle evolved into the Texas Longhorn, a lean, mean survival machine with an incredible tolerance for heat, a resistance to deadly tick-borne diseases, and massive, dangerous horns unions. Within hours of birth, dairy calves are permanently separated from their mothers to ensure that every single drop of milk can be diverted into the human commercial supply chain, a separation that triggers days of frantic, heartbreaking vocalizations from both mother and offspring, showcasing the deep, suppressed emotional depth of these animals. Male calves, useless to the dairy industry, are routed into the veal or beef production pipelines, where their movement is heavily restricted to keep their muscle tissue soft and tender. The animals are branded with hot irons, dehorned with searing chemical paste or mechanical saws to prevent injuries in tight spaces, and pumped full of prophylactic antibiotics to prevent the rapid spread of disease in environments where thousands of animals live hoof to hoof on concrete slats. The pinnacle of this industrial optimization is a feedlot, a surreal, high-density landscape where tens of thousands of cattle are confined in open-air dirt pens, surrounded by automated feeding troughs filled with a highly concentrated, unnatural diet. To accelerate growth to rates that would be physically impossible in nature, the cow's revolutionary four-chamber digestive system is pushed to its absolute breaking point. Instead of grass, they are fed a rich mixture of corn, soy, and industrial byproducts laced with synthetic growth hormones. This high-starch diet causes the pH levels inside the rumen to drop dangerously low, creating a chronic, painful condition known as acidosis that would eventually kill the animal if it weren't for the constant administration of pharmaceutical drugs. The cow's body becomes a high-pressure pressure cooker, forcing it to reach market weight in a fraction of its natural lifespan, transforming a wild, grass-eating survivor into an ultra-fattened industrial product. Inside the automated dairy facility, this exploitation reaches a level of mechanical precision that feels like science fiction. Modern dairy cows are hooked up to computerized milking machines that use electronic sensors to monitor milk flow, somatic cell counts, and tissue health in real time. Through intense genetic selection and continuous lactation cycles maintained by keeping the animal perpetually pregnant, a single modern dairy cow can produce up to 10 times more milk than its wild ancestors ever could. This extreme production places an immense metabolic strain on the animal's skeletal system, draining calcium directly from its bones and leaving many individuals completely burned out and structurally crippled after just a few years of production. When their output finally drops, these exhausted animals are systematically discarded from the assembly line and routed straight to the processing plant, proving that in the industrial matrix, efficiency is the only law that matters. This massive, global assembly line has successfully turned the cow into the most heavily managed and commodified large mammal on the surface of the earth. We have reshaped their bodies, altered their genetics, and completely controlled every single second of their existence to serve the insatiable demands of a growing human population. Yet, despite this absolute level of human control, the story of the cow is far from over. Because out on the edges of civilization, far away from the concrete pens and the automated milking parlors, a bizarre and terrifying counter-revolution is quietly taking place. In the most remote, abandoned corners of the globe, groups of domestic cattle are breaking free from their chains, reverting back to their primal roots, and demonstrating a shocking capacity to survive, adapt, and reclaim the world without any human help whatsoever. In the forgotten zones of the planet, from the dense, tropical jungles of abandoned Pacific islands to the harsh, snow-swept wilderness of the remote European forests, a profound biological transformation is occurring completely out of human sight. When domestic cattle manage to escape the confines of industrial farms or are left behind during human evacuations, they do not simply perish like other coddled domestic species. Instead, a terrifyingly efficient survival switch flips inside their genetic code. Within a single generation, the docility bred into them over 10,000 years begins to dissolve, and the ancient, sleeping instincts of the prehistoric aurochs come roaring back to life. These feral herds are proving that the cow does not need humanity to survive. In fact, they are uniquely positioned to inherit the earth if our civilization ever falters. The transition from a captive farm animal to a wild feral predator vader requires a radical restructuring of the herd's social hierarchy and physical behavior. In the wild, feral cows abandon their slow, aimless wandering and form highly organized, militant social units governed by a dominant matriarch and protected by a circle of fierce, hyper-vigilant bulls. The young calves are kept hidden in dense brush while the adult members of the herd take turns standing guard, scanning the horizon with a sharp, intelligent focus that would shock anyone used to seeing domestic cattle. Their physical appearance begins to rapidly shift as well. Within a few generations of wild living, their bodies shed excess fat, their muscles become lean and dense, and their horns grow longer and sharper, reverting back to the lethal defensive weapons of their prehistoric ancestors. They learn to hunt for clean water sources, navigate treacherous mountain terrain, and aggressively defend their territory against any threat. These wild herds have demonstrated an incredible capacity to adapt to environments that are openly hostile to human life. In the exclusion zone surrounding the catastrophic Chernobyl nuclear disaster, abandoned herds of cattle have not only survived the invisible terrors of radiation, but they have thrived in the complete absence of human interference. They have learned to forage in the deep snows of the Ukrainian winter, breaking through the ice with their powerful hooves to reach hidden vegetation and coordinating collective defenses to successfully fight off packs of wild wolves and lynx. Similarly, on remote, uninhabited islands across the globe, feral cattle have modified their diets to eat seaweed and toxic tropical plants, proving that their incredible four-chambered digestive engine can be repurposed to conquer almost any ecological niche on Earth. This incredible resilience suggests a haunting future scenario that completely flips the script on human dominance. For 10,000 years, humans have believed that they were the masters of the cow, using their bodies to build empires and fuel the fires of industrial progress. But from an evolutionary perspective, it may actually be the cow that has successfully manipulated humanity. By allowing themselves to be domesticated, they force humans to clear millions of acres of dense forest, eradicate their natural predators, and transport their genetic lineage to every single continent on the globe, making them one of the most populous and geographically successful large mammals in planetary history. They have used our infrastructure to achieve global dominance, and now, their dormant wild genetics are waiting patiently in reserve, ready to reclaim those cleared spaces the moment our control slips. Ultimately, the cow is not a passive victim of human history, but a patient, evolutionary shapeshifter that has successfully played the long game of planetary survival. Whether trapped inside the clinical metal bars of a high-tech factory farm or running free through the radioactive forests of an industrial wasteland, they remain an absolute force of nature tied to the ancient legacy of the titanic aurochs. As we look toward an uncertain future marked by shifting climates and ecological instability, one thing remains absolutely certain. The bovine species possesses the internal chemistry, the physical power, and the deep, resilient genetic memory required to outlast the very empires that sought to enslave them. If this deep dive into the hidden power and secret history of the animal kingdom changed how you view the world around you, make sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more cinematic untold documentaries, and hit that notification bell to join us for our next exploration into the wild.